Good evening and welcome to the October 3rd Community Preservation Committee meeting. I'm going to open the meeting, although we are still waiting for a couple of members to come on in. The first thing we're going to talk about is the treasurer's report. Ken, did you want to just go quickly over what had
Okay.
happened with the warrant articles?
All right, so on the treasurer's report, I did finally get a chance to meet with Anita, the town accountant, after the close, which was just recently. I was trying to meet with her every week for several weeks in a row until we finally did get together. And we determined what we did is we go and change the estimates to the final close numbers in the report. So fiscal 2019 now is the actual after the fact numbers for all the accounts, and they do match what's on the town's approved books. And there were no material changes to them, by the way. They just, the undesignated fund might have had some transactions in it that I don't bother keeping track of that had to be adjusted for, but there's no material differences from what we were using before. So anyway, that's closed out. And if we had color copies of them, you'd see that there's no highlights on the 2019. Where on the 2020, the green highlight, which is the darkest one, is for estimates.
Okay.
The the blue highlighting, which is the medium light one, is for what's happening in this next meeting. And then the light yellow highlighting, the lightest one, is for what we expect to happen in future meetings beyond the next one. So the top couple of items are all, what we did is we estimated the surcharge based on determining what the actual 2019 surcharge amount was, and there's always a whole bunch of adjustments that go into it at the end that are small, but change things around a little bit. So anyway, we got the right number for 2019, so it simply increases that by 2.5%. That's the rule. Then the state match is still estimated at 1157, which we think may actually in the end be twice that much.
Okay.
But it's $50,000. And so but anyway, given the official estimate, we calculate what the total revenue is for this year, and then we take 10% of that and put it on the three reserves underneath. Mm-hmm. And we just determined these amounts on Monday. And so any numbers being used in the draft warrants were simply estimates that we've been carrying
Okay.
until this point. And so those are the correct numbers. So then we're taking the administrative reserve and the Pell Barn bond payment out of that revenue, and that leaves us with $273,750, which is the number in that other warrant we do.
Fund balance for CPA purposes.
So we've already approved the $200,000 for the the common restoration, plus the rest of it, which adds up to $651,000. That's already been approved, but it's coming out of revenue. It comes out of this account, so that reduces it further down to $73,750.
Okay.
And this number, again, since we tweaked the revenue number a little bit, that was just a little bit different than last time, not much. Then the carryover funds was interesting if you are interested in these things, because there was a $155,000 difference between the number the estimate that I was carrying and her closed numbers. And I did speak up, even though it was in our favor. I could have just kept my mouth shut. We'd have $155,000 more.
So it was just
But anyway, I did raise it up, and she eventually figured out why she had an extra $155,000 in her account,
oh boy.
and she fixed it. So
Okay.
it's back to pretty much where it was, where we were guessing it was going to be. But that's going to be the initial number that's actual. So anyway, you can see what else we've already voted. 3 articles from the May annual town meeting against the carried over funds. And I guess we don't have any proposals this meeting for that. So that's how much we have left in the in the undesignated fund. So anyway, it's $216,000. That's a low number for us in the last couple of years because we didn't do anything for quite a few years.
Right.
Anything big. And so having done something considerably big in the last town meeting, it was like $1,200,000 worth of grants, all good ones. All good ones. But so anyway, so it's a low number and it will build up again. So the reserves are shown, and these numbers agree with the town accountant, and we have a bond payment and the weights and measures we already voted to come out of that. This time around, we've got the baseline reports for $4,000 in front of us, and the Cisco homestead for $45,000. So that's going to be this time. So anyway, it kind of adds up at the end. That goes away from their respective reserve. And so we have at the end of the year spending no more. We have $284,376 left around. And that'll increase by $500,000, and maybe be closer to $600,000, next year. It'll just increase by that much. So it'll build back up.
Yep.
That's that.
Okay. Sorry, I'm just silencing my watch. All right, and remind everybody when we, then July 1, we refresh again, right?
Right. This next coming July 1st, it'll be visible at the spring town meeting.
Oh, it will.
At the annual town meeting in the spring. We'll see the estimates for what we'll have next year.
Okay.
And it'll be 500,000, 600, maybe close to 600,000 more
Great.
than that.
All right, well, we can't take a vote on accepting the treasurer's report because,
No, well, it probably
don't-
won't change between now and the next meeting anyways.
No.
So,
okay,
it
so we'll
It-
talk about
yeah.
it again. Clerk's report, we're gonna wait until our next meeting. So the main reason we're here, is to talk about, Article 24 on October 21st town warrant. So Mr. Carlson is here to answer our questions, so thank you for coming. You're welcome to come sit wherever, if you want to sit there, or if you feel more comfortable. Wherever.
It's okay if I got power here. I'm
Yeah.
a little low on battery.
Perfect, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you very much for having me. Mr. Often sends his regards, and unfortunately, he's chairing I should say unfortunately. Fortunately, he's chairing the Finance Committee's public hearing tonight, and I couldn't make it, so he asked me to come down and maybe answer any additional questions that any of you may have. In addition, take any feedback maybe back to the committee as well.
Can you just tell us, because this is, I know you've been on CIPC a lot, but this is different. This is the CIPC bylaw committee.
Yes.
Can you talk a little bit about the membership and how they differ and all of that?
The membership of the bylaw committee, it does have some overlap of the existing CIPC that's appointed by the Board of Selectmen.
Okay.
This membership is strictly made up of those people appointed, one member from the Finance Committee, one member from the Select Board, and one member from the School Committee, in addition to two members at large that were appointed by the town moderator, because town meeting warrant article, in other words, said, hey, yes, we want to go forward with this.
And who are those members?
Those members are Jeremy Graves, Colleen Roy, I myself, a select board member, Ms. Marr as a school committee member, and Mr. Often as the finance committee appointed member.
So there's only 5 of you, huh?
There is only 5.
Oh, that's unusual for a committee. That's a nice little one.
So at any rate, we've been meeting over the past couple of months. We have took an analysis, just kind of give you some background about how we got to where we started from the charge to where we were today, and what you see as draft warrant language to be considered at the semi-annual town meeting. Was based on a lot of research of other communities that have similar makeups and charges. And there were some that I will admit that were very restrictive, that we felt that didn't provide enough maneuvering room to perhaps maybe augment and change over time as the town's needs or demands change over time, So we basically left the committee as more of an advisory if the bylaw were to be enacted. So it really kind of follows in the spirit of the town charter. If you read under, I believe, provision on section 7, towards the end, it speaks about the capital plan, and if, capital planning committee, or capital committee if by bylaw. So by this bylaw, we're basically just, we're initiating that component of the town charter that was drafted back in 1986. And as such, it is to be really just an oversight group to look at the projects that qualify for any type of capital investment. So the town's financial policy is that any non-recurring project that is in excess of, I believe, $10,000 and has a life expectancy of 5 years or greater is considered a capital request. And essentially what this committee will do is it would look at that at a totality throughout the whole committee.
Excuse me.
Yeah.
How long was that policy you just mentioned been in effect?
As far as long as I can remember, I've been involved with town government for 15 plus years, and the capital definition is set by the chief financial officer, which is a policy that the town administrator has adopted. And I believe it's set forth by, guidelines by the Department of Revenue. I'm now kind of going a bridge too far by making that statement, but I believe that it's not just something that a town just makes up a number in an arbitrary set of years. I believe the Department of Revenue from the state gives guidelines to that.
What have the procedures been during that time for getting capital expenses approved?
There's been individual warrant article items for like maybe a specific project. So one in particular that I can tell you from one extreme would be when we built the new high school about 10 years ago.
Certainly, yeah.
That's technically a capital project
that's
of substantial
major,
size. To where we invested, I believe, 15 or $20,000 for the Parks and Cemetery for either a new piece of equipment for them to operate within their purview. So it was Mr. McInerney's idea to form a committee several years ago, about 8-9 years ago now, that brought community members together and really advocate and review a list of what the departments were requesting. But on top of that, it looked at everything, as a matter of fact, at one point, and then over time, the committee's charge was augmented and kind of modified and changed. And I understand the public hearing that occurred just the other day, I believe Mr. Often made a statement, and Ms. Roy, that recently we're not, as the town is looking at capital projects, we're seeing that there's other funding sources being utilized, but not really being reported as a capital project. So I'll give you an example. The school department will, for example, refit a room at the school because it needs to meet some sort of compliance. If it didn't get put into the warrant article under what you see today in the town's capital plan, then they take that out of the expense line item. But technically, that's still considered a capital investment that the town is approving, but the funding source is under like the expense. Whereas I talked to you about the Parks and Cemetery, where they got a piece of equipment for, I don't know, $20,000, and that was put under a separate article with a separate funding source that was coming from free cash. So what you're seeing today is just a small snippet of the town's capital investments that are occurring. And that number that you see at town meeting warrant it varies anywhere from $1 million to $1.2 million, depending upon the year. And I can go back and provide you with a ton of reports that will outline all of the plans that have been submitted and approved at town meeting.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if you can tell I've been doing this for a while, so if
you-
I go a little long-winded, it's a lot of history.
You explain it well.
I have a quick question while you were paused. I was going to wait till the end, but as long as, so if this new bylaw establishes this committee to stay in an advisory role, how is it different than the current CIPC committee?
So the current CIPC committee has it differs greatly because it's looking at any or all projects that qualify for capital, not just what the town administrator wants them to review. So the way that it's been operating for the past couple of years has been, we would get a very finite list of capital projects, and we would say, this is it. You know, one year it was a rubber stamp. Like, we didn't look at any other requests that were made. We didn't have any analysis. We got this one sheeter, and the committee felt that this greatly differed from the year before, where we received a lot of different capital requests. And Mr. McInerney gave us a pot. Here's a pot of money, and we ran down this list, and we kind of gave a sorting order. And the way that operated was, it looked at all of the requests on an annual basis, and then those requests didn't make it, we would see them come up next year, and we would weigh and score those and make the recommendation to the select board, and the select board would then adopt it or make their changes. The way it's been happening now for the past couple of years has been, it's been reduced to, we're only seeing the list that the town administrator wants to approve. So it's gone through a screening process that we used to do in the very beginning, which was then reduced to only items that were presented by the town administrator, to then just a single list saying, here's a balanced set of capital lists that meet my financial goals for that fiscal year, and they say, here you go, and then that's it. We really don't have any more substantial discussion beyond, okay, yes, we see a bunch of capital items that the town administrator submitted. We see that it balances with the figure that they're providing. And what else do we do but approve it? I mean, we don't have really any deliberation or any
But
discussion
that is
about-
his role in the chart that the charter lays out. I mean, it is his responsibility to provide a capital plan and capital list.
Absolutely,
Okay.
yes. Yeah, and this committee does not, by any means, change that role of the town administrator.
Well, that's where I get confused, because I guess I don't understand how it would actually work, like how it would actually happen. Say the school committee has a room they want to refurbish. It's not in budget season. It's not on capital. They think it's going to cost 15 grand, so technically a capital project. The school department controls their own budget. They're their own, they have their funding source. They can find money within their own budget or whatever. They move it around at their meetings, not at town meetings. So they, have more flexibility that way. So do then they have to now come to this committee to get approval for doing that project?
Well, approval and advisory, I think, are two different things. The approval process is nothing more than a group of people getting together and just reviewing what's there and the information provided, and making sure, does it meet the definition of a capital requirement? Yeah, of course it does, because that's what's being submitted. But it's an advisory only. So at the end of the day, if something falls, and this happens throughout our town departments, like we find out, like, oh, there's a hole in the roof and we need to fix it.
We need a new truck.
We need a new truck. Let's say that pops up in the mid-year. Then it's, one of two things can happen. Either the department takes it out of their line item in mid-cycle, and to your point, does it get reported into the rears? Yes, it does. I watched the meeting, and you brought up a really good point about if things happen in mid-year, and they do happen, then all we're doing is creating an ongoing list of these capital improvements as they're happening. So yes, all best laid plans of mice and men, we like to know ahead of time and be able to predict. But then there's the unpredictable piece of running an operation of $61 million a year.
Right,
And
there are several classes of those, and they happen.
Exactly. So in anticipation that this is only a plan, it is not like the one true faith that the community should be using as, like, if it's not in the plan, oh my God, we shouldn't do it.
Well, listen, a couple of years ago, Super Park was not, there was a lot of pushback at town meeting because, oh my God, even though we've been talking about Super Park since they tore it down for the high school, because it wasn't on CIPC's list, therefore people fought against it at town meeting. So it's tricky. So you're forming this newer advisory committee, which I still don't quite understand how it would work differently than the one it is now, except for adding another layer of government, which, we already vet all of our projects through.
So actually, there's a couple of questions that you raised here.
All right, go ahead.
One is that how under this new system, how are those unplanned, emergency or short fuse, capital expenses made vis-a-vis this organization? If someone, okay, let's just say, somebody needs a new truck, and all of a sudden the old one broke, they can't get along without it, they gotta have a new truck, they gotta have it, they're gonna get a new truck, they, and they, allocate, they find the money from somewhere, and they're going to buy a new truck. How does that scenario,
That's a
how is that handled
that's-
within your,
that's- that's
how
a
is it
great-
to be handled in your new system?
That's a great question. It gets handled the same way it's being handled today. So obviously, if something happens in midstream, if you think about it, at town meeting, we raise and appropriate money for a whole fiscal year. So we're a funding system. We're not based on a cash accrual system. So we're fund accounting. So we fund everything up in the front end, and we plan that saying, hey, the town has a specific amount of assets to spend for all of its liabilities for the next fiscal year. As it spends that down and realizes that it needs to spend something that qualifies as a capital, and because something does come up, well, then all they do is record it. So it's not like it goes through an approval process, but it gives the town an idea of, under a single pane of glass, about where, its investments are being made. Whereas if money was set aside traditionally for expense related items, but then we're finding out that, hey, we're spending a lot of items in this one account for capital requests, well, then maybe they don't fund that account for expenses. Maybe they fund it for specific capital because that's what they have to do on a year-to-year basis. So it's really just to provide some optics for the town government
Right.
to see.
And so,
At any given point.
this particular department, with the agreement with the town administrator, are going to make this transaction, and so they do. And then do that, at that point, fill out the equivalent of a request submission in arrears, and they submit it to you and say, okay, this is it, so that you can record what they did
I mean,
for your looking forward and looking backward.
the bylaw was very ambiguous in that case, where it allows the committee to really kind of define how it wants to go reporting. If you notice in there, there's no specifics as to the reporting.
We noticed that.
We noticed.
Yeah, we noticed all
Okay,
that.
but as the committee evolves,
Yeah, but this is a bylaw. I mean, committees can evolve and we can change their charges, but when you put something in a bylaw, it shouldn't be evolving as it goes.
Yeah,
It
That-
should be
That's
set.
supposed to be the
It-
Constitution.
Yeah,
So anyway, that's, I think that's a very valid point. But actually, there's a kind of a second issue that you also raised, and that is the effect of this process on this committee. And one of the things that you probably noticed in the treasurer's report is that we have town meetings twice a year, and we make grants which would qualify for the capital expenditures twice a year. And we do it regularly. We have a process that's been it's very specifically outlined in the bylaws and in state law as well, as to how we handle all of the approval and analysis of our expenditures. So it's very well specified, and it happens to work really well too. This committee's been following those procedures for 19 years now, and they work pretty fast. We manage to turn things around. We can analyze projects and approve them or not, or shape them or not as they come through our process. And we do this on a cycle of twice per year. And the capital budget that you explained that's been in use for as long as you can remember did not include this committee at all during that same period that you recall. And so we've been working entirely in parallel. And so there's no real need or the, state Commonwealth Act of the Commonwealth that says that we should do things differently than we do them now because we follow that act. So anyway, I think that the operations of this committee have been working outside of and independent of the town capital procedures, which are very important. And it's, and what your committee does with respect to the town department capital expenditures is very important. But this committee feels that it doesn't apply to the operations of this committee. Just as when you described the process that you remember for as long as you can remember, the CPA was not included.
My
Well,
only point on what you just said there, just I want to make this point to me is that
Actually, could I just say one more sentence?
you may.
We think that the idea of recording the CPA expenditures alongside of the town expenditures in arrears, of course, is a good idea. And it'll help give you a better big picture of what's happening in the town if you record what we do. But it would have to be, and, you know, it could readily be arrears once a year. We tell you what we've done, and you can include that to expand the big picture.
Let me retort on that for 1 minute. And
Can I just say one thing? please?
Okay,
Sure,
now you-
Justin.
Yeah.
That was, that's how I was finishing.
My only comment I want to say, just as a point of order in my head, is that you did say we as a committee, we never made any formal votes on how we believe as a committee yet. That may be the case.
Excuse
You-
me, could you repeat that? I didn't quite understand it.
When you were just saying, now you were expressing an opinion of we as a committee for how we believe versus this bylaw. We haven't made any vote how we believe as a committee yet. So I feel that's a
Okay,
little,
all right,
a little out of order there.
All right,
I just want to
okay.
be explicit.
Speaking for myself,
Yeah.
speaking for myself, I
That-
think
that
those
is fair.
things, right? Because anyway, yeah, I did take a chance to review the bylaws of this committee recently, and they are quite very specific. And all these things we do are things that are in that bylaw.
if I may,
Sure.
through you, Madam Chair.
Actually, John is here, so I'm clerk and I was filling in, so John is here. He's the chair.
Couple things that I would like to bring up. First of all, that if the town meeting were to approve this bylaw tomorrow, this has to go in front of the Attorney General's office for approval and ratification. And obviously, if it comes back from the Attorney General's office that it doesn't meet or has some problems with the wage charge, then it comes back saying that, nope, you can't enact this, you're gonna have to go back to the drawing board or forget it altogether. That's the first step I wanna say. So it should take into consideration any other act or bylaw or anything constitutional or mass general law that we have today. They will review that. And they do that for every single one of our bylaws. The second part I do want to bring up is that there have been on several occasions through previous members who served on the original CIPC that there were department heads that had made grant applications that were outside of the town.
Yeah.
And I'm going to use the word grant, and that's a ubiquitous term because where the grant comes from doesn't matter. But they made grant requests, but they still qualified for capital requests. But where we recorded that and how we showed that on the list, we were saying that, yes, we see this as a capital project. We see that this is on a list, and therefore, if we do indeed receive a grant for that, then yay. If not, then that project doesn't get funded. We don't shift other things around. So we don't put one thing in front of another if there's some sort of outside funding source. In particular, in for FY 2015, there were several budget requests that were for the exterior of the library that were made from the library director at the time. And I was looking at my list, and there was a library window repair, and then there's a library door restoration. Now, I don't want to get into particulars as to whether those meet your guidelines.
We remember that.
Okay, so those two requests came in, but they were submitted as capital requests, but they were applying for a grant to pay for those. And in our notes, in our guidelines, when we showed in the capital report to the select board at the time saying, if this does come through, if this does get approved and it meets all the criteria, then this is just showing that the other funding source outside of, let's say, what Tim controls is going to cover the costs and pay for this. So it shows the town, it just shows everybody, and it does work in parallel to some of the projects that you've demonstrated.
Yeah.
There are some other projects that I agree that, would it fall in parallel with the list? Probably not. Like you were saying, if something happens midstream and does it get reported in the rear, then yeah, it would get reported in the rear, and then we would have a list of things that have occurred and have happened.
That makes sense. I think that one of the important things about the illustration you gave just before the last one about the library was the key thing there was it was a town department that was making this request for funds, and I think that as it states in your bylaws, I think this is this is very valuable for town departments to follow. But this committee is not a town department. And the distinction is that that was the grant requestor was the town department, and that worked as it should work.
That's a great distinction.
That
I
worked as it should.
Totally agree with you on that one, yeah.
Okay.
And one thing that comes to mind with this CIPC and the bylaw for me is that even if they don't have the time to meet with the quorum in our time frame of doing a approval for a CPC project, having us let them know either ahead of time or before maybe Super Park as an example, hey, we're thinking of having Super Park in May, if we can, or whatever you were saying a few months ago about Super Park, then we took it off for not doing it this warrant. If we do let CIPC know that, hey, we're thinking about this, maybe, in the case of other things like the library pieces, if they were coming to us for, funding because it's a historic district, they could go, oh, well, we have this other, project in the CIPC thing about redoing the whole library, that may, they can advise saying that may not be worth approving because we have this other thing we're looking at doing soon, maybe in a year or two from now. Having that under one committee that does at least have the capital projects, to me, could be beneficial even to the CPC, outside of whether they are going to say, yeah, you should do it or you shouldn't. That, to me, whether you should is to this.
But most of what CIPC is gonna do are things that we cannot do.
You're right.
So for the most part, I mean, they're way over here doing their thing, which is great. We're here doing our thing. And what they're doing isn't
There isn't
of
very
great
much
relevance
there
to
isn't a
what
lot
we're
of
doing.
Right. There is only the library was a point where it overlapped, but
Yeah.
it doesn't overlap very often.
Yeah.
Can
Another
we,
place it could overlap is the common, things where we do
Yes,
the
the
common,
town common, yeah.
But
project.
that's a
And-
project that would never get done if
And
it
that-
went through the town,
that's just-
CIPC. And CPA funds, their purpose is to do those things, those extras, that the town normally cannot fund. It's there for those
Yeah.
specific purposes,
But-
and,
yeah.
usually there isn't, yeah,
But
so,
if there was a relative minor safety issue on the common that the town would be doing, but it does cost more than 10,000. Let's say there was, benches that were, falling apart, and I don't know the cost of benches and engineering fixing them. But if that would be considered a CIPC, project that someone in the town submits, but we're thinking that we're going to be doing it, having that overlap could be a benefit to both the town and the CPC.
Mr. Chair,
I don't know.
if I may.
Yeah, I kind of agree with what you're saying. I think, though, that the responsibility for reporting it should be the requestor in the case of in a case such as the town common. It should be the organization requesting it should be reporting it to your committee, because the requestor is probably a town department in that case. And so they would have to report it as it is written. But if it were some, third-party organization, and I can't think of an example right now, that was not a town department, then I don't think it would apply that much. And you would get when we make a annual report, you'd get a copy of it and see that project on the report. But if it were the town common, that's clearly done by town department, and so that clearly applies
It's
to
not
what
being
you're
done by
saying.
town department. It's not being done by town department,
what's not being done?
the common.
Well, in my example
not
about
this
something on the common needing to be,
Yeah.
needing to be handled rather than the whole common itself. But
Mr. Chair, I have a great example of where this would also run in parallel with your committee. And if I may add, maybe one of the things I would like to maybe make a recommendation and change is the overall makeup of charge, is to say if there's an appointed member from someone from CPC that would serve on that, because there are certain times where there might be projects that do run in parallel, and one that I can think of, okay, is the proposed super park today, where we did allocate a sum of money from town several years ago, and I know CPC at the time allocated some money, but that's sunset, and by your bylaws, right, you had to revert back and then, start over again. But where you're utilizing two sets of monies, and it is something where I could see a great partnership, because if we identify potential projects down the pipeline that may qualify for CPC, and if it's something that the CPC warrants and believes it's a righteous enough project and wants to go forth and fund it, then I can't think of better two groups of people that can see alignment, because you might see some projects that are 5 years down the line for us that might qualify for CPC funding. So,
Can
It's
I
just
interject?
redundant,
There's,
though. It just
within the
seems redundant.
CPA legislation, and Stuart made this pretty clear at the training session, that CPA legislation was enacted and exists for projects that cannot be done by the town. It's not meant to supplant capital expenses. So I guess what I'm trying to say is,
Yeah.
if there's a capital expense that a town should typically do and can't do, that doesn't mean it immediately goes to CPA. Right? I mean, I think that, I just want to make sure that everybody remembers
And
that.
so to follow that, it'd be best to keep an arm's length distance.
I would recommend that.
Keep
I will
and so that would,
I will
that
say,
would go
Joe,
counter to
if you
what you
can
just
wait.
suggested. Pardon?
I was just asking him to wait for you.
Oh, done.
Apologize.
I'm done.
All I was gonna say, Joan, is I got a different understanding from how he said that. Though certainly we can reach out to him and get a clarification, for sure. But my understanding was, if the town did say we're going to do this, puts money toward it,
Right.
and then for one reason or another doesn't follow through, can't finish funding it if it's a long-term thing, or doesn't, or ends up not funding it after they've allocated money in the first place, then we cannot pick up that project and do it.
Absolutely
I-
correct. That would be that would be a complete
Yeah.
violation
I
of the
did
act
not-
in the
yeah.
eyes of the DOR.
Yeah.
But the spirit of the act. And
Yeah.
we can revisit it.
But
But my role here is to kind of remind folks of the technical aspects.
But
I'm-
my example, like about that was that if there is something that is capital project down the line with the town, but something that we're thinking about that might qualify for a project that would negate the necessity of that capital project, could be also useful to know about. And
I
that
think it's a fine line.
but
It's a fine
being-
line.
CIPC versus CPC, an example of the benches. If we've done the restoration and then they come back in 10 years and say, we want $10,000 for benches, I would see our committee being more inclined to say that is a normal operating expense, even though it's a capital expense. That's not something that we should be picking up.
So if I may add to that, I agree with you on that wholeheartedly. And where I believe there may be some confusion is that this is the one true faith. So your guys are nothing more than just another grant opportunity for projects that people come to you from the community or from other organizations, or potentially another department might come to you and apply for a grant. And it's solely up to the five of you to propose that grant for town meeting approval. Right? I mean, that's how you operate. And that this is nothing more than an advisory committee, to your point, on town capital related items, but there are some items in there that we kind of do in parallel, to your point.
Yeah, we do them, but this committee does not advocate, solicit and manage projects as the committee. This committee, has proposals made to us, and we approve them or not, or usually or not, or don't approve them, but we don't actually do them, and we don't manage them. They come to us. And so it's like, we have a general, set of priorities, but we don't have an agenda for specific projects. And we don't manage them either. So we don't plan them, we don't bring them to ourselves, and we don't manage them. So we're a little bit more passive than I think that, than
Is this just a recording
the discussion has seemed
system?
that we might be,
Sorry, I thought you were done, sorry.
I'm done.
Oh, I was just asking, is it just a way to record things after the fact?
Yeah,
To analyze analyze
No,
what.
but is that the whole purpose of this bylaw is?
Oh, no, not this
Oh.
part, no.
Oh, okay. No, I just am trying to figure out what value, the word you used last week, like what value this adds to the way we currently do it. And I just don't see it. I see it adds another layer of,
But not really to the CPA. This committee doesn't seem to apply
yeah, but what
to
if we
us.
want to go in, what if there's a piece of property that we want to buy in conjunction with the town? you know, like
Right.
what if,
I mean, I
what
have a
if
list of
Robinson
questions
comes up
that I don't know
and,
if they've been answered.
and the,
Then the.
we don't have enough,
then the-
and we have to
then
work with-
Then planning would come to us saying that we, the town can afford some amount of money,
Right.
but can the CPA add more? If the planning comes to us, then planning works with our committee.
So a
As-
town
as
department comes to you
specified.
and
If it
requests
were,
money.
if planning would probably, may lead that, or conservation might lead that.
Right,
But those,
conservation
those
probably.
groups would come to,
but that, those groups would then have to go in front of this committee as well.
well, it doesn't really say that.
I
It just
know,
says that
that's
they.
it, it's so
just-
hard to know what it does.
It just says that they have
Can-
to,
can-
to like submit and, make a submission. And it doesn't say that the committee has to,
Okay.
then they can go forward and finish it. It doesn't say the committee approves anything.
So what happens if
There's
a
no,
piece,
the word approval's not in here, it's only advise.
a piece of land comes out?
And
That's the
advise,
key-
I
that's
presume,
the key
advises,
word.
I
That is-
presumably you're advising the selectmen and the town manager?
We're advising the town.
The
That's
town,
what the bylaw
right.
is. So it
It-
advises anybody who is willing to listen to the report, but
And,
yeah.
and so they'll take a look at it based on their point of view, and they'll make an advisement. And then, but in this case, the selectmen, the town administrator, the planning and the conservation group and the CPA will go do what they're gonna do, or not. And so this doesn't really, and in fact, these probably don't even meet between the time the project starts and ends.
You can, as, if I could,
Go ahead.
use Robinson, the recent Robinson property that, we purchased at Springtown Meeting, came out of chapter 61A, 61B. Use that as an example, if you would, John, like how would that,
Okay, so
how would this
that's
fit into that?
100% purchased through CPC funds. So, and it is completely out of your
Right.
time frame.
Right.
So we're doing all
It doesn't
this,
say, it doesn't exclude
Yeah, and that was
CPA.
led
and
by-
it
that
happens,
was led
but
by-
what happens
led by
if,
the
let me
plan.
let me
It was led
ask,
by
let me
planning.
let me ask, please. What if it's, there's a fund and the town, hidden away, that we can spend money on purchasing land? So that the land is $500,000, $1 million. So we're gonna use $500,000 of town money and $500,000 of CPC money. This comes up in July, so we're gonna vet it at our July and August meetings and put it on the warrant for October town meeting. How does that timetable, how does this fit into with your process? And because there are deadlines that we're not meeting, and because part of it's town money, you do get to say, well, we don't think this is a priority.
So it's the group and the plan is a living, breathing thing. And like I said earlier, it doesn't mean it's the one true faith. Like if it doesn't in the plan, you can't talk about it. And we said earlier, I think before you walked in, that if something were to happen midstream and it didn't meet the timeline, then it's being reported as using other sources of revenue, through a grant process, like any other grant
No,
process.
but our concern is that it's a hybrid, that's town money, wherever it is within the town budget, and whether it's capital budget, whether it's operating, wherever, I don't know where you're gonna find it,
So-
but there's money, that it's a hybrid project, and it has to happen.
To Ms. Thomas's
Yeah,
point.
between February and July.
to Ms. Thomas's point earlier, all right, the town administrator is charged with that. This group doesn't change that. So if the town administrator is moving money into a separate warrant article item to cover an objective, okay? And yes, does it qualify as a capital investment on behalf of the town? I'm not gonna lie to you, yes, it does. In part of the reporting scheme, okay, it would get reported that we spent $500,000 on a capital piece of property, and it just, excuse me, and it just so happened that it ran in parallel with a grant process. That's it.
Okay, so,
It doesn't change anything you do.
I know, but I'm sorry, part of my hang up with it is, in the past, like, I know you're saying you're an advisory group, but the perception at town meeting is not that. Because in the past, we have had CIPC stand up, and the way the bylaw or charter, everything, the select board and the town administrator can put any projects up for capital, on the capital plan. But if that list conflicts with your list, it's a perception problem. People are like, oh, why didn't you run that through CIPC? Well, we don't have to. And that's what happened several years ago with Super Park and see, which is why it failed the first time. Because, oh, you didn't put it through this process. Well, we don't have to put it through the process.
No, you didn't. If somebody, I can't, I don't want to rehash Old Town meetings.
No, I don't either, but I'm just saying
but
going
from
forward,
from a CPC process, I'm not quite sure how I answer that question.
yeah, but I mean, like, well, no, there was some town money and some CPC money at that point. And no, I'm not saying it to rehash what happened in the past. I'm just bringing it up because of what may happen in the future. If we come to this committee and we vet money for a park, and then you guys don't agree that that is a good allocation of the CPC resources,
Or it doesn't meet your budget.
or it doesn't meet
this
your
year when we're trying to deal with.
then are you gonna stand up, is this committee gonna say, no, we don't think that's a good project? That's what I'm worried about, is if we have conflicting opinions about things.
So right now, Ms. Thomas, that conversation doesn't happen. So we don't really vet like the prioritization of what limited funding we have on the town appropriation side, not necessarily your grant process side. So like to your point earlier, we have no say over whether you approve a grant or propose a grant to town meeting or not. You still continue with your process. If something comes midstream and you're looking for approval because something comes up, then I mean, you go to finance committee and you talk about it with them at the warrant level item.
Right.
And I understand that some of this pot of money may come from what could have been reserved for capital projects. Like right now, we typically use free cash, right? I mean, it's no state secret. That's where we get, actually all of our capital funding for the most part that you see in that warrant article, but not the other stuff that we were talking about. Again, it doesn't change anything that you or anybody else, if someone wants to propose a warrant article and they want $1.5 million to go build a statue in South Grafton. This bylaw doesn't prohibit citizens from proposing their own legislation for town meeting to consider. It does not do that. It's advisory in nature only. But to your point earlier, yes, I think I do recall there were several people who utilized the CIPC committee in an unfavorable way, in my opinion, and I didn't agree with I'm going to rehash old business, and I said I wasn't going to, and I agree with you. I believe they used a committee that its role was not intended for that. It didn't go through this process, so therefore, why
Yeah, you can't
why
have
we
the
say
money,
no?
yeah.
And that opinion to me, I thought was commentary that was unwarranted. I wasn't the chair at the time, but I was on the committee, and I did see that. I think that happened maybe a couple of times, but since then, that has not occurred. And I can tell you one other time that I'll bring up, because I'll bring up the other side of this, is the North Street window project, where the school board at the time proposed a plan. And I know this has nothing to do with community preservation, but I'm giving you another example of something that happened midstream, where they proposed to replace the windows to an MSBA grant process. But the town had to put the warrant article item to go out the bond for, the $3.1 million. We were going to get 52 cents on the dollar through a grant process through the state. And it wasn't favorable, so we didn't go forward with that. So then the next thing we did was we proposed, well, instead of replacing windows, let's repair them because they're in such dire disrepair. We were counting on a grant to subsidize a larger project. And that came forward to the CIPC in midstream, and we did consider it, but we said, look, under the current charge by the select board, this request really shouldn't have fallen under us to review at that time. This bylaw at least allows us to have the continuous conversation all throughout the year on anything that may be capital related, and doesn't restrict it to just being those things that the town administrator wants to submit. So if there's a citizen's petition, and I'll go on that, saying that they want $1.5 million to build a statue in South Grafton for whatever reason, all right, it doesn't prevent them from doing that. But again,
Well, they need a funding source.
that's a whole. I totally agree. That's
You
a whole.
can't just
other,
put something out without a funding source.
and people have learned about that, right? And they said, sorry, you're out of order, right? So but that doesn't prohibit anybody from doing that.
So since, I'm sorry I missed the first part, but my question that may have already been answered is, as drafted, Does this bylaw require that CPC comply with it?
After hearing how you guys operate your grant authority, I would disagree that no, you don't comply with town departments. But if a town department is requesting, I will go a little step further. If a town department is requesting for a capital improvement project, like for recreation, and they wanted to use one-time monies in a grant, then I would say they should submit that. It's not that we're not gonna say no if there's another funding source for it, but let's say that there has to be a share. Let's say there has to be some contribution that the town has to put up, but then CPC says, hey, look, if that happens, then we're ready to go. Here's, whatever money that town meeting approves, then yeah, you would want that to be kind of knowing ahead of time.
But
And
the,
that,
but you're saying is that the requesting department would be responsible for interacting with your organization?
right, you guys are not
this
a
committee,
department.
but the requesting department.
You guys are an active, the Commonwealth that we adopted, 15, 16, 17 years ago?
Close to
19,
20,
right?
19
Was it
years
20?
ago.
I'm sorry,
Close to 19 years
2000 it was
ago.
signed.
2000, 19 years ago.
So at finance committee, what I came away with was that every September 15th, we have to submit a document to the state that lists all the projects that we have funded in the previous year. And at finance committee, Matt was saying that was acceptable to present that document to Tim, and that would satisfy your need for information.
Yeah, because you're reporting it in the rear, we
And
absolutely.
it's always gonna be in arrears. That's our problem, is
Absolutely, yeah,
because
right.
we don't project out a year or 5 years. We project out 3 months.
Lucky you. And I mean that,
No, I mean, it would be great, but we don't have that luxury of knowing.
Yeah, we don't control
what's
who
coming
comes
down the
before us.
pike.
We don't control we don't control who comes before us and asks for grants.
Right. That's
And
why I
we
said
just-
anybody can, this bylaw doesn't prohibit that.
Man, I think a lot of it's because these are not recurring projects. So it's not like a school budget where every year it's gonna be X dollars plus 3%. This year it's 100,000 for purchasing land. Next year it's 2 million. The next year it's 0. So it's just based on what presents itself in our process.
By the way, I can speak on behalf of the committee of this. We did talk about CPC to some extent because it was, when I was bringing up some of the historical requests and stuff, that I said you guys do a lot of great work on behalf of the town, and I know Mr. Often had stated that at the finance committee meeting. But if we didn't have this, we wouldn't have the things that we have today. We wouldn't have the South Grafton Mill Villages Park. We wouldn't have a lot of the amenities that we see today. We wouldn't have had these projects. So I believe that what you guys, what this committee does, and I'll speak personally on this, is you make our community better.
I mean, and that's the whole purpose of
That's the
CPA,
CPA,
is it's icing on the cake. The town's supposed to take care of the town's business. We're making it better with whatever projects.
And I
That
believe there are
can't be funded
sometimes, but I
normally.
do believe there are sometimes when they do align with similar outcomes. And I believe it would be those few times that it would be extremely valuable to know from a capital perspective. If we know something that's going to be, I mean, we know we've got a super park that's, contingent upon some additional approvals, but that's good for us to know about in the proposal component of it, where if there's additional town monies that need to occur after the fact, I mean, we can show that there's that potential liability that, hey, we may need to consider covering this at a later date, that some may fall
That's-
outside of.
But we don't hold money for that, but also in terms of long-term, this would have been helpful to know that the school was gonna gobble up the super park and the school committee had no intentions of replacing it. So that this would fall on us or somebody else, that would have helped us say, okay, we need to set aside every year X dollars because we're gonna have to rebuild this.
Yeah, and it wasn't just the super park, if I may add. It was also the skate park, and it was the courts that were up here as well. And I understand, to Ms. Thomas's point, that back at the time when I first got on the board, I was eager to utilize the residuals that were left over from that project to make remediation at the loss of those assets. So I've been a staunch supporter of that all
Because I
along.
mean, I think this is something you know, it's
I'm
almost
speaking
been
personally here,
10
so-
years that's been gone, and that's a shame for the kids, because there's so many families that have come to us or spoken, and I've seen in the paper, you know, that they brought their kids and they really wanted to continue to do it. And we still as a town, and I feel bad that we haven't done that, and there's been a lot of
Hopefully May,
roadblocks
hopefully.
along the way.
Now, John, I do have one question that may be for you or someone else that's been on this board longer, or even for Peter. But if we have a project that gets submitted to us, let's say we got another one that's submitted to us, you know, for May's meeting, that would be $1 million. We don't have it in our budget right now for the CPC to approve any from us for warrants for May for that much. Now we might say to the applicant, okay, well, we're not going to be able to approve this. You know, try next year or
We
whatever.
bond it,
You-
if it's
you know,
worth,
You know, if we
if
could.
it's
you know.
enough money.
My main point that I'm getting to is if we know we're not willing to bond something, but we might have the money next cycle for us to take up. Is that something that we would then say to the applicant, okay, well, no, we can't do it right now. And they say, okay, well then I'll be back in a year, I'll be back in 6 months. And we know it's a capital project level thing. Is that something that we should or would have to tell the CIPC about? That the applicant
I guess
said
it
this would
depends
be.
on what it is.
Yeah, that was my kind of.
I think
Thinking
it's
now.
those rare, if I may add, Mr. Chair, I think it's dependent on what the specifics are in that. And I do believe, to Mr. Holdberger's point, is that there are certain projects that may intersect with one another where there's reliance on both the grant and local funds to supplement or subsidize that project. Again, any time, and I can tell you from the history of being on CIPC, anytime there was matching funds to do a project, you know what happens? That went to the top of the list. Just telling you history. You can ask all of the former members. Back in 2015, it was myself, Lisa Kelly, Doreen DeFazio, Craig Dolphiny, Sargon Hanna, Carl Moisen, and Bob Nolt. When we saw matching money, that gave a really big high priority because we realized that there was an asset that was coming to the town that wasn't going to cost 100% of the project. It was being subsidized by some other funding source outside of regular appropriation or free cash.
Well, and we as a committee, we like to see matching funds too, which is, and a lot of times we do,
And a lot of times it's town money.
it's town money.
That's matching, which is one of the things that concerned
Yeah, that was one of our
the
concerns.
committee, how does this affect?
So if I may add one thing, and if you would be amenable to this, I know we're going to be scheduling one more meeting, but I mean, is there any interest of adding to the membership to the overall committee, someone from your board?
Well, you can't change it before town meeting though, the charge.
We're not changing, we're just changing the membership. We can make that change. We can make that amendment at town meeting floor.
Oh, you can?
That's within the scope, absolutely. I just wanted to ask if you guys feel that way.
I don't, but,
We can't make the decision, you don't have a quorum.
yeah, we don't have a quorum.
Oh, wait a minute, you don't have a quorum?
No.
We need
We're just
5.
discussing.
We're 9, we're a committee of 9.
Committee of 9. Paul Scarlett was gonna come,
I
not
thought
to
you were
throw him
committee
under the
five.
bus, but.
I was wondering, now I know, I
think
understand
you
what you
forgot.
meant, and I'm like, wait a minute, yeah, you can, all right. Thank you.
No, but if, I mean, when we do go back, I mean, some of the problems that I see with it are that it's a bylaw, so it's supposed to be something that's easy to follow, and it is confusing, and it's not really again, like what Ken had said, it's not making, it's not saying you're making any approvals, or, I don't know, I find it, difficult to read and understand exactly what it does without explanation.
So does the CIPC, either as it is now or is proposed to be, Tim says you have $1 million. And
Probably
this
a
is,
little less.
and these are all the, no, I'm just making up easy numbers. $1 million. And you can spend it, or you can prioritize however you want. I was hearing that you don't prioritize. What happens, you have access to $1 million and you have and your project's worth $1.5 million. What do you do? What is your job? As it is now and as it will be if you are successful with the new
As it is now, alls we get is a balanced budget list from the town administrator to the committee to say either accept it or not.
So he gives you a list.
Over the past 2 years, this had changed our operating procedures where we used to receive all of the lists. I'll give you an example. We received, I think, something like 40 some odd projects back in 2015. And not all of them could be funded with the pot of money, obviously. And then any place where there was other money, we didn't carry that balance forward. But that's why I said those items would go on the top of the list. Like you wouldn't need to have town appropriation approval because they were being done through it. But we were showing the transparency of like, hey, look, this is stuff is getting done. And we had to prioritize and make a recommendation as a committee through a rubric that generated a discussion. And then based on that rubric, when we implemented it with a scoring system, we then were able to put this up on a screen and say, how does this look? There's something that doesn't look right by the way we score things. And then as committee members, we would make recommendations about how we felt about the priorities. And then we would differ from the scoring to different priorities based on this project's been here for 5 years. They've been waiting for this. This should have been probably higher, and then we would have a discussion. And as a committee, we used to make a recommendation based on this whole group of liabilities that were to the town, where we only had this amount of money, and we would try to fit and make a recommendation to the select board, and then the select board would either accept it or reject it. But over those years,
But you were having to say, we have $1 million and we choose to put these 12 projects in that $12 million. And then
But
these
you-
others
but you say that's
may be
changed.
great.
it has changed, yes. Yes, it has changed. And I believe it has changed to what we were operating with, and then how it's changed today is, what happens is when you take away the public's, to Jen's, perception of, it was leveraged in a way that was not conducive to or relevant to a conversation because it was a separate warrant article item, and it delayed a funding mechanism for the super park. That this committee now, with the way it'd be structured, would operate just as an advisory board, and then anyone who operates in that has to operate an advisory board, and anyone who's like I said, at that point in time, the chair at that time kind of spoke out of line at a select board meeting, giving a report with another member of the select board, and I would agree with Jen that it derailed the project, or it gave it a very negative look upon voters. It made it more challenging. That's the word I was looking for, sorry. So the way that this bylaw would be structured was that it would be only an advisory in nature. It doesn't approve anything. The town administrator can still submit a separate project list on, but they'll do it based on, hey, I see that this is the way you're scoring, this is the way you're prioritizing. I need the prioritize.
So it's the selectmen that still are gonna say, here's the town administrator's list, here's
To
CIPC.
Jen's point earlier, it does not change the town administrator's role and responsibilities, the chief financial officer for the town.
No, I'm not saying that. I'm saying that if you come up with a list and he's like, well, I think this is really important and this should have been in there. So he would say, okay, well, I'm gonna submit my own list, and the selectmen have to say, figure out which one or the other or a hybrid of the two that they're gonna pick to fund. So ultimately, the selectmen are gonna make
Yeah.
that.
The town administrator advises, and the CIPC at the moment advises, and then
I'm confused, and it's the minutes. I want to make sure I get these. So, you described the process that happened in the past. There's a process that happens now, which I think is you just get a list, and there's really no decisions that have to be made around that list. So what you're really looking to do is to get back to the way it used to be.
And yes, and look beyond, because, yes, the answer to the
Okay.
question is yes.
Okay.
I won't go any further because I don't know how the committee will then structure itself if the bylaw passes. We left a lot of wiggle room for it to operate a little bit more in conjunction and allow for it to operate a little bit more of its own discretion instead of having, because at one point we wrote a version of the bylaw that was so specific, and to your point earlier, it would have made it, if you don't have it in on this, for anybody, you know what I mean? So we felt that that wasn't really the nature or what the spirit of what the capital planning committee should be doing. So we had that discussion, and that's what you're seeing today. But if there's anything else I can answer on behalf of the Community Preservation Committee with regards to the bylaw, is there any, have I answered all of your questions? Is there anything else?
I do have one more that just came to me, is that this was intentionally left a little vague to Jen's point about bylaws are probably better when they're more specific in our bylaws. Is the intent that in 6 months to a year, if this does pass this fall town meeting, that it would be modified to kind of be to the CIPC board's, actual operation as it's going on after this does pass? Like to be more, to specify it better and have that pass the town meeting to make that more specific?
I guess it could be, because the bylaw is not specific on how it's going to, how the day-to-day, I'm going to say, process will work.
Did you guys get everything answered that you wanted?
I think so, but it's just a question of, are we, trying, hearing the answer that we want to hear or hearing the answer. So it seems to me there's nothing in here that asks anything of this committee as written.
Requires.
There's nothing as written requires anything from this committee. To my understanding of it, is
You made
that
it very
correct?
clear that you're a grant, you're a grant authority.
Right, and so it doesn't mention the CP. It doesn't mention this committee. It mentions departments, that it has some interaction with town departments, of which this is not one. And so, if that committee requested that we give you a copy of our annual report to the state, we would certainly do that.
Oh, it's public
But-
That's
record.
gonna
But that
include
doesn't seem to
affordable
be-
housing stuff, too.
But that's not in this bylaw. And so the bylaw seemingly is independent of this committee.
But we would be doing that more as to make your list more complete.
Right, and that's a good thing. That's a good thing. You should include these capital grants that we have.
Because some of these aren't gonna be town project, like for the
Right, and
Historical
you can
Society.
ignore
did
the ones you don't
things
care about and
that-
Well,
record
the
the ones you
committee
do.
can, yes, that's why I said the committee can absolutely, but if there was something that maybe the committee felt that it maybe wanted more information, then
Like
the
with the
committee
NEMOX.
can come to your meeting.
With the NIMBUS.
Certainly.
That's not town-owned property.
Yeah, the
Right.
NIMBUX is,
So
correct.
that's money that would be on our list, but you would say, we're gonna delete that.
That's correct.
yeah, you're just going to overlook that. So that's fine.
Exactly.
And so,
I still have the same concerns about land purchases because I feel like they need to happen quickly and they already go through conservation.
well, what it is,
planning and-
my understanding would be, if the Robinson purchase were carried out in the, under this system, then, planning sent out a notice to many town departments and some outside, and the land trust and a private organization, sent out notices and said that, we got this letter of withdrawal. We need to get together, decide if we want to exercise our right of first refusal. So there was a very rapid meeting
Yeah.
that took place with a representative of all the committees that were involved. And they decided that it was this is a piece that we've been looking at for a long time. We need to do this. It's really important. And so everybody agreed it's really important. And the CPA looked at our finances and said, hey, we got enough money to do that. And so the planning led it. So planning would report to you. Conservation was involved. But planning led it. So they would report to you, and that's fine. And then everything else would proceed as it did.
That sounds extremely reasonable to me.
So just so that, because I'm still kind of fuzzy, sorry, if, like for the common, that's already been approved, already in the pipeline,
It's in the rear.
So
It's in a rearview mirror.
but that's not, but let's say that it comes up, part of it, and I don't know if that's gonna change because of the technical abilities of highway to do some of this, but to remove, some of the blacktop or remove some of the dirt where the current pavement is on the common. If that's the case, then part of that that is technically either town resource, town money, town in kind. how would that process, what should we be doing with that? They give us the application in July, we discuss it at a public hearing in August, and September 1st, we submit the information to the town administrator's office for inclusion on the warrant, because it's a hybrid, and it includes town resources, in-kind services, maybe not cash, but you technically have to pay the people, so how would this fit? Would we have to say, okay, we have to wait a whole year or not?
You would have to run that by the town administrator about how they would utilize town employees as an expense towards a capital project if he would lump that under like capital services. And that's what some organizations do for accounting purposes. If it's a project to, redo a lot of infrastructure for technology, for example, and it requires an amount of staffing to do that. Some accounting will say we're going to lump that on and we're going to depreciate that over 5 years. But I think that's up to the policy of the town administrator. And you bring up a good point, and I think, to your point, it doesn't stop the project. It doesn't say, stop, you didn't do this. It would happen, like you were saying earlier, if things do occur during midstream and we need to just show it somewhere in the report, just to show that, hey, look, the town is spending a considerable amount of money on all capital projects. It's a little bit over here, it's over there, it's over here and over there. But at the end of, all we see is at town meeting is we only see this one thing. And my observations have been, well, we're doing a lot more. And I think that if we were to show the public, we're telling a better story about how our community runs, and that we are continuously putting investments in there, and that when we're budgeting, that we're, I believe that we demonstrate good financial policy and transparency for the public to really see that. Because right now they only see that one warrant article, for example, at town meeting that just kind of shows.
So do you
that
see
$1
that, like, I don't know that recreation has done anything else. They've used CPC money for things. Do you see recreation or other departments that are using their own funds for capital, that they're not coming to CIPC, and so therefore it really is not included?
It's just school department, I would think, would be the only.
Nope, they're not the only ones, but there are other departments, for example, that have done that in the past, where there's been expenses that cost over $10,000.
That they have
life
enough money in their
expectancy over 5 years.
budget to do that.
The school department has done that historically in the past a great deal, because that's how it just operates.
And is this gonna be
But it doesn't.
an issue for them?
Well, those are unplanned expenses, and those will be handled the same way.
It's just a fund. All it's showing,
but
guys,
the-
is
actually,
just
the
where
only
the funding
difference-
source is coming from at the end of the day.
Yeah,
If-
the difference, the difference is going to be that since you will be informed of it in those cases in arrears, when you say, this is what we spend for capital this year, last year, and the year before, and this is what we plan for the future, you're looking backwards will be accurate, way more accurate than it is now. You're saying it basically is not accurate now. But-
It's not that it's not accurate. I believe the information
Well, it's
is recorded.
incomplete. Okay, it's
accurate, but it's
incomplete.
not in
I meant
one.
incomplete.
It's not in one place where we can all look.
Right, so you can't, you can never get the big picture. And this system here will assemble the big picture.
Part of it, yes.
And so you'll be able to see all the various kinds of capital expenditures made in recent history, and to understand, how to look forward.
I'm all for the recording of, I still am nervous about the one more layer. I mean, we move slow for a reason. Government's supposed to move slow. It just, one more, it just adds something else on top.
Here's an idea, and just hear me out. Let's say we do it for a year and it's just an absolute utter disaster. Well, then get 10 people, sign a petition, get rid of the bylaw. There's your exit strategy.
Yeah, but government isn't, things should be thought through before you do them, not after.
I didn't make the rules, but you're right. I agree with you, Ms. Thomas, that yes, I'm all for more thoughtful government, and I think in the spirit of what this bylaw does is it does provide that. Does it provide an additional layer of what you're saying? Absolutely, it does. It provides the same layer that what we're doing today under the select board's charge of the CIPC. But what it does is it makes it. What this does is it allows town meeting to dictate what it shouldn't look at in the future. Like, for example, we were looking at debt excluded items, and then all of a sudden the select board says, nope, you're not to consider anything that's debt excluded. that's a capital improvement to the town. It's not that we said we would say we would fund it or not. We were saying other funding source would be debt exclusion based on the outcome of a town meeting. If we said that that failed, we wouldn't be going under, free cash to maybe fund it, right? So, when that changed and when certain things started changing, again, we were looking at this great picture. We were providing a lot of information, a lot of feedback, and you had a general public that understood what was happening. And then all of a sudden, it kind of got shrunk down to what I was saying over the past 2 years. So if the town says no to this in October, then it continues as it's been going. Nothing changed for you. If the town says yes to this, I anticipate that you guys will still operate and continue as you've been doing. It doesn't change your role or your responsibility or what your authority is for the town in approving grants or providing the town meeting to approve the grants.
I think that's my concern, or some of our concern, is that in some way that this could put the brakes, not a stop sign, but a yield sign on a project, because there's either perception or in fact or just perception that our decision isn't still our decision.
The decision's town meeting's decision, right? Ultimately, at the end of the day, you just present.
No, but that it can't get that far because
Oh, see, that
That's what
again,
I'm
I go
saying.
back to
And
that's why
that's-
we changed it from we were the approval to just advisory in nature. Advisory. Again, the town can do what the town wants to do. Someone can put a warrant article in tomorrow, and that's what the town administrator says, Peter, anybody can put a warrant article on there, and we would have to, if it says to put $1.5 million in a statute, it's outgrafted. I know I keep
Right.
putting that there, but I mean, if someone did that, we would have to follow the rules. If town meeting says yes, then guess what?
you've got to find.
This town has to fund it.
If this has nothing to do with what we're talking about, maybe it does. If somebody did say that, did they not have to have a funding source other than raise and appropriate with their warrant article? Or do they have to identify in the budget, there's $1.5 million that's available to them to spend for that project?
I don't want to get into particulars of how town meeting procedures work, but I believe that if someone were to put forth a warrant article, that there has to be a funding source. And I know that the town is charged with providing a balanced budget. So
Right.
I think the answer to your question would be that if you raise and appropriate something that may be outside of the balanced budget, you would have to go and find that money within the appropriation, and then that would be ultimately some reduction in some other line item that, I mean, whether someone can do that or not at whatever specific time. I mean, the moderator may rule that out of order. Again, I'm speaking for the moderator here, but I've seen that happen in the past, so you can
So
go back
now
to
they
look at some of the other town meetings. and
Juggle
s-
the budget to
Yeah.
make something fit.
We saw that happen
That's
at the
not
last
a
town
huge
budget.
dollar amount, but it still had to be balanced.
We saw someone try to maneuver $15,000. And it was ruled out of order because there was no funding
No,
source.
there wasn't enough
Correct.
for you.
Well, there was no funding source. There was no appropriate funding source. So the town moderator ruled the article out of order and the town meeting went on.
No credit cards accepted.
And to Ms. Thomas's point, that's why you need to involve collaboration at the very beginning of processes. And again, it doesn't change what you guys do. That's not the intention of what this bylaw is for. And again, much like to what you said, the spirit of what the Community Preservation Act is doing, the spirit of this is to provide a group to look at all town department related capital projects and to be able to provide an analysis and to be able to provide some sort of report for all of us to be able to see. Because let's say we differ greatly from the future town administrator, okay? Wouldn't someone want to say why? Why do you differ? I mean, I can think of that, but I mean, very rarely has it differed, even in the previous years before when we were doing the analysis. So, all right.
I should say, as one of your points, John, about you're afraid of this, putting a yield sign on some of our projects. I think that the public, whether they are properly informed on the actual procedures or not, they're going to grasp at something they think is a reason to say no and could convince other people to say no. And whether this passes or not, the idea that the CIPC exists as a committee and wouldn't have vetted something could still be a reason someone would grasp to as a reason to try to say no. Not that they're right to do so, but I think that's something that, people that are not as familiar with government process, especially municipal level, may even, without intending to be wrong, could be completely wrong about a point they're trying to get their opinion to have town meeting vote in their way. So I don't see that as an issue with the fact that the bylaw will be created. And that's just my opinion on that piece, but just wanted to.
And something else I may add too, if you're asking the question like when, if this were to pass, like would this be implemented tomorrow? No, it would not be implemented for the next fiscal year. It'd be the one after that.
Does it say that here?
No, it's just, it's impossible because if you think of the timing and the time that it takes for the state to come back with the bylaw review, I mean logistically, you won't meet, May town meeting's requirement. Cause they take 6 months to review a bylaw.
To get back to you.
So it'd be 2022,
It would be FY
2021.
20.
Well, we know we start
No,
talking
'cause
about
next year's-
21 right
Next
now.
year's 21.
Right, so it would be 22.
Two.
Yeah, it would come to town meeting FY20.
All right.
All right, I don't have any more questions, thank you.
Did I help you guys? I mean, I
Yeah,
hope,
yeah, you
I mean,
did.
I'm not
You
here
did.
to try to sway your opinions. I'm just here to answer your questions.
Yeah, thank you.
All right, guys.
Thank you,
Thank
Peter.
you very much.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks for
Yeah.
coming.
Yeah, thank you for having us again. Appreciate everything you guys do. Thank you.
There's no-
Okay,
I don't
I think
there's
that's
anything else.
the long and the short of it, right?
Well,
Did
we
we
don't
ha-
have a quorum.
Did we?
for
We don't
it.
have a
we
quorum,
can't do
so
anything
We
anyway.
can't do
No,
anything.
yeah, so you can.
So we
motion
can't
to
even
adjourn. I guess you can't even motion. to
have a
adjourn.
discussion to
Nope.
say, what do we think?
No.
No, that's
I think you
okay.
just did.
Well, we can say what we think.
Well, we asked
can't
questions.
Have a
What do we-
consensus or not
Right.
of opinion.
Well, that's fine.
Yeah, we
can
can't
still
record,
discuss.
we can't record an opinion, right?
Do you
Okay.
need a motion
Are you
to adjourn?
adjourning? Adjourning?
Well-
Adjourning?
I don't think we
walk out
technically-
on you.
We're officially, you can
We're out of here.
leave and you can have minutes, we just
I
can't.
think if you adjourn, then you're,
Yeah, so I
you
don't
have
think we
quorum.
can officially vote to adjourn.
We're
is what I was gonna say.
posted,
Oh, if we adjourn, no, I'm saying, are we
to
adjourning?
me.
We're leaving, yeah.
but
We never
don't
were,
have
we
a
weren't really, ever,
Quorum.
We were
I
never
just
a
don't think
quorum.
we can't conduct official business. We
Yeah.
can just
Ended the
talk.
meeting.
So, meeting adjourned at